Congressman Scott Peters, welcome to our podcast. It's a real pleasure to have you here. We've known each other for a long time. I've seen you in action at City Council, at the Port, and in Congress. I think San Diego is really something to be proud of in your service in Washington. I'm really anxious to hear from you on the American Rescue Plan, the Insurrection, and really what the country can expect in the legislative calendar that's remaining. So tell us a little bit about really what's going on, the temperature of Washington, and start with the American Rescue Plan, if you like.
First of all, Shahryar, thanks for having me. We look exactly the same as we did 20 years ago, except the hair color might have changed.
Yeah.
Anyway, so the American Rescue Plan, we did 5 bipartisan COVID relief plans last year, and felt that there was a lot more to do. We knew there would be more to do when we came into Congress, and this was a very, very ambitious rescue plan. So it dealt not just with COVID, but really put an emphasis on doing what we could to invest in a way that would really make sure that we got through this, the economic lull, kind of the medically induced coma that we were in, our economy was in, help in a healthy way. And actually, we knew we were taking the risk that we would overheat. And in fact, I think you could find areas where we did apply too much money, but we thought that was a better mistake than underfunding. That's what had happened in the Obama response to the recession, and they didn't know that would mean that the recovery would be slower. But we knew that it would be better to overshoot than undershoot, and we did. So a lot of money went to states and localities, which was a difficulty we had with Republicans. There's a lot of employment in those sectors, as you know, and you and I both worked in the public sector quite a bit.
Right.
It's very important work. Without that support, I think there would have been a lot of layoffs, and not just police and fire, but engineers and all the people who do the work of the cities and counties and ports. So we thought that was important. Obviously, we gave a lot of money to making sure that vaccines were deployed. I give some credit to the Trump administration for helping to develop the vaccine, but I have to say they had no plan for distributing it. And I think the Biden administration does deserve a lot of credit for that. And then a lot of support for small businesses, whether it's restaurants or venues that are trying to get started again. We got a little bit more work to do in that sector, but made a lot of money available for through the PPP program that had started last year, but we funded it some more so that, we thought it was easier to keep people on the payroll than try to pick them back up if they've been unemployed. So.
Right. So, tell us a little bit about the negotiations, because, from the outside, it's hard to believe anyone would be against helping Americans recover. But it sounds like the Republicans were more interested in how to spend the money and make it a smaller infusion of money. Tell us, maybe just comes in context.
Well, there was some nervousness about, we borrowed so much money now.
Right.
I'm kind of a budget hawk, but I was pretty unapologetic about borrowing money for this purpose. You have a good balance sheet so that you can respond to crisis.
Right.
We did that in a bipartisan way last year. And I think even Republicans acknowledged that there was a need to do more of that with respect to COVID, but there was an honest disagreement about how far to go. And I think that the Republicans are just much more restrictive in what they wanted to do. So they definitely did not want to give money to state and local governments. I mean, I heard people argue that that's defunding the police. That would have in effect been defunding the police, in fact. But also we did some things that have been waiting a long time, like the child tax credit, expanding that, and making sure that every child is supported through the child tax credit, so that kind of poverty didn't really hit them. It was pretty expansive. And I think some people have called it the most progressive piece of legislation since the New Deal.
Right.
I think that might be true, but a lot of it's temporary too. So we'll have a lot of work to do to figure out how to extent to which things can be extended, the level at which they can be extended. And that's going to take some more effort.
Right.
But, so it was at the end of the day, as you saw, we reached a point where there were no Republicans who supported it.
Wow.
Every Democrat supported it.
Wow. It's just hard. Even if you're not in politics and government life, to look and you see, well, both sides are Americans.
Yeah.
Both sides want this country to prosper. Why wouldn't you at least throw your hat in support of, small business, all of those people impacted, and so many small businesses wiped out in our own community in San Diego. This couldn't recover. So I think the legislation is well needed, deserved, couldn't come fast enough and soon enough.
Yeah.
And I think you're right. Although everyone's worried about inflation, they're not, you have to do something.
Right. Well, I think that's the thing is that, now we'll get to talking about long-term investments. We're out of, I think, we're out of the recovery.
Right.
Now we're on to what we're going to do to invest in infrastructure. That may be a different conversation. At that point, you might say, what are the pay-fors? I generally think things should be paid for. I think that a lot of the Trump tax cuts on the wealthiest Americans were ill-advised. I actually was one Democrat who thought that the 35% tax rate was too high, made our companies uncompetitive. But President Obama had proposed 28%. Even the most staunch Republican tax cutters, like the head of the Ways and Means Committee, Mitt Romney, they were at 25%. Well, Trump went to 21%.
Right.
I think that's overshooting. And I always think that there is no need at a time when the economy is doing well to cut taxes, the marginal rate from 39 to 37% on the very people who can afford it. Now that the country is in a spot where it's prosperous, now's the time to get our fiscal house in order. And I think we can have that discussion going forward. But that means that, it means that we have to talk about revenues, which Republicans are famously loath to do.
Right.
Somehow they get this notion that they're fiscally responsible, but the deficit always does better under Democrats than Republicans.
Right. It does. So thank you for that explanation. I think you can never explain Washington legislation enough. And there's always more to explain. Let me move on to the next topic, the insurrection. I know you were there that day, when we talked, and now the panel, the Republicans shot down the commission, whatever, and now we're talking about this other thing. And at first, the minority leader said, we're not going to put any Republicans now, we're going to put some Republicans in it. Since that's kind of fresh, evolving right now, what do you expect to come from that conversation? Do you think it'll be constructive?
I hope so. I have to say that as an American and as a legislator, as a member of Congress, this was one of the most disappointing things that we couldn't come up with a bipartisan way to look at this. And frankly, I thought that Speaker Pelosi, she came out with this a Democratic majority panel at the beginning, and I thought that probably wasn't right. We should have done the 9/11 thing, but ultimately they called for that. She did exactly what they asked for,
right?
And she put together a panel that was even. That had staff on both sides, that had and we basically did everything that Kevin McCarthy and Mitch McConnell asked us to do, and then they said no.
Right.
And this is an attack on the Capitol. It hadn't happened since 1815, I think, the War of 1812, and we knew who the enemy was then. Now we really need to understand this, and you've got this happening in the wake of people claiming that the election was stolen, and still 30% of Republicans believing that Biden didn't win the election. Wow. Even though, Republicans and courts and Republican appointed judges and Democratic appointed judges around the country rejected every challenge, this lie still persists and this misunderstanding. And it's very, very dangerous, I think. And Republicans are doubling down on it in trying to change the way votes are counted, literally change the way votes are counted state to state. So this is a very dangerous thing for us. And I believe that we had to do we had to do this commission appointed by the speaker because we didn't do it in a bipartisan way. I feel really bad about it. I think this is speaking as someone who's been in public life for a while. I think the most dangerous thing for America, the most challenging thing is not any one issue. It's the fact that we're so divided.
Right.
And that politics has become religion.
Right.
And I work really hard, Shariar, to try to bridge that person to person.
Right.
And I try to make friends and go to dinner with people that I really disagree with. But that's, it doesn't come from Congress. It reflects America. And I think Congress needed to respond by saying, let's figure this out in a bipartisan way that's totally fair. And I was very concerned about that. So we'll have a special committee, a select committee, as we call it. And the people that Nancy put on there, I think, are very fair. Two of my closest friends, Pete Aguilar, who's the vice chair of our caucus, and Stephanie Murphy, who literally was handed, the day that the Americans left Vietnam in 1975, she was a baby and was handed up to by a Marine to safety.
Wow.
And she cares very much about this democracy, and it hurt her in a way that a lot of us didn't appreciate, that this could happen in her new country, the country that shows signs of what she fled.
Right.
So I was there. It was if you want me to tell, I can tell you that story if you want.
Sure.
At the beginning of the term, it's like the first week of school. There's not a lot to do, right?
Yeah.
So this was January 6th. We were sworn in, I think, a day or two before, and the first order of business was to certify the election. And I was, since I'm not from one of the challenged states,
right,
Arizona, Pennsylvania, California, they weren't making a challenge. I wanted to go watch. They said, well, you have to ask to reserve a seat. And because of COVID, you have to sit in the gallery because we have to spread everyone out. So we sat in the area where the public sits.
Right.
And the people who are participating were down on the House floor, on the bottom floor.
Yeah.
And so I was excited. I got the first time. We called early. We got I got my 1 o'clock slot, and I put my suit on to go watch this thing. And we noticed so they did a thing where Pence, the vice president, presides. And then when there's a challenge, the Senate goes off by itself. And after the Senate went off by itself, Nancy assumed the presiding chair. And then we noticed she was gone. She was replaced. And then we noticed that the police were pretty forcibly taking off the floor members of leadership from both parties. And our majority leader, Steny Hoyer, is 80. He's not a naturally fast runner. He was getting moved out of there pretty quick, and something's up. And then we heard that something I'd never seen is someone who wasn't in Congress went to the microphone and made an announcement. They said that the Capitol's been breached.
Wow.
And that you need to remain in your seats. And they locked all the doors around us.
Wow.
And I wasn't watching the video that you were watching probably. So I didn't know that it was, I figured it was 10 or 15 people. And I was thinking, how in the heck in this place, one of the top terrorist targets in the world, are civilians getting in through here?
Right. Yeah.
Again, a question I would like answered by a commission. But there we were. And then they said, underneath your seats are masks. We want you to get those masks out. And because we may deploy tear gas.
Wow.
And so I said, wow. So, okay, we pulled the mask out, and the thing is, it turns on automatically. So there's this low whirring sound. It's happening all around, like all through. It was the background noise of this whole event, was the whirring of these gas masks.
Wow. And
they evacuated the people on the floor. And if you remember where Ashley Babbitt was shot, they all walked past that point. We're pretty close to the protesters on the House floor. And but we were left up there on the gallery wondering what's going on. And ultimately, it seemed like forever. It was probably 10 minutes later, they evacuated us, and we had to go around a horseshoe to the other side. And as we got to the other side, we're finally about to climb the stairs out of the chamber. They said, hit the deck. Wow. And you heard a gunshot, I think it was the shot that killed Ashley Babbitt. Happens to be my constituent.
That's right. Yeah.
Which was tragic. And we were just told to wait there. And down at the bottom, you saw that scene of the barricade of the House floor with the guns pointed at it. And it was a really pretty shaky day. And, some people, I wasn't aware of how many people it was. So I was kind of curious. I actually looked over the side, and the Washington Post has me looking over the side while everyone else is lying on the ground. But the lady behind me was making the plane crash call to her husband. That,
Wow.
I love you. And a lot of people were really traumatized by that. I think you asked about the mood in Congress. I mean, that's really where we started. That's where we started. And there's still hard feelings among a lot of people about people who, after that, voted not to certify the election.
Man.
So we have a lot of conversations. I mean, in a place that was already divided by politics and by the pull of the extremes, it made it even harder. And I would just say I'm thankful that we have a president who is so committed to the country and really wants results and really trying to get this bipartisan infrastructure bill done, which I think is great. We're lucky that Joe Biden's there at this time and not the previous guy.
Right. Wow. Thank you for that. Thank you for that explanation. You're right. As much as you watch the videos, you don't really have a personal account being there. And it was, I think, doubly shocking to folks like me. And I think you mentioned one of your colleagues being, an immigrant like myself, and the immigrant community at large, the minorities in this country. We thought we left that behind.
Right.
We thought we left that government uncertainty behind. I mean, if nothing makes you think this country is on solid ground, is looking at that building. Right. And coming to Washington. I always tell people, you're okay. I'm glad you're an American. I'm glad you took the oath, whatever. But until you go to Washington, you really won't understand this country. You need to go. It's like the American Mecca. You need to go and pay your pilgrimage to Washington, D.C., to walk in those streets, to really see the people that you see on your money on these monuments that you stand and just as much as it is overwhelming, it is also, I think, very intimate place because in so many ways Washington is tiny. It's a small city, right? So a couple of blocks and you get to the whole thing. You get the flavor of the whole thing. And being an immigrant and coming, especially from a country like Iran and the revolution, and then watching people scaling walls, which is what I watched when I was 9 or 10 in Iran during the revolution, and cars burning. And I thought, again, I left that stuff behind. I'm in the most stable democracy in the world, right? The model of democracy. And
sorry, I would say that democracy is it's always a fight to keep your democracy.
Right.
When we fought in 1776, we fought in the Civil War. We're fighting now. And I appreciate your perspective because you're someone who doesn't take it for granted.
Yeah.
Juan Vargas always says that the best Catholics are the converts. I feel that kind of way about Americans too. Like, that in many ways, it's the people like you who've come from another place where freedom wasn't taken for granted, liberty wasn't taken for granted, where you appreciate what we have. And I think the problem with a lot of us natives is that, it's to be taken for granted and it can be eroded in ways we don't notice. So I'm very attuned to that. I think that January 6th was the beginning of our vigilance, not the end of it. Although the institution's held, I'm very proud of the institution. We stayed that night to vote to certify the election. And that's the one night I stayed in my office. I slept there because it took us a long time, but I was proud to do it. Thought it was my job. And I felt a sense of satisfaction that after all that, we had taken those votes. Yeah. But we have to struggle to keep it. And I think it's a real issue.
No, you're right. And being a convert, I sometimes walk around and I say to myself, I don't know if I've ever said this out loud, these guys don't know how good they have it. Right. They don't know what they have here, as troubled and as divisive. And, yes, I get it, but it's still an amazing place, this country. Every community, every block, yes, prejudice, social inequity, great chasms, in our social classes and the haves and the have-nots. I get it. But you don't know what most people left behind. I totally get that. That's why, like on July 4th, I really like taking a little time to celebrate and pat yourself on the back for this amazing democracy that's lasted for so long. Yeah. It really is. It's a beacon to other places. And the whole thing is we're not perfect. Yeah. But we can overstate how awful we are pretty easily. And I think we all want to strive for a more perfect union, but I asked my 12-year-old son, what's the most important thing about being an American? He was born here, obviously. And he thought a while and he goes, well, we're not going to agree all the time. So preserving the union is the most important thing about being an American, right? So how do you then preserve the union, as you say, the more perfect union, and kind of deal with such visceral hate? I think that's the new. People say we're never been this divided. Yes, we used to fight with muskets during the Civil War, 60s. Yes, now we fight on Twitter and these big lies and stuff. It's different, and there are casualties. There's hate crimes abound. There is all kinds of impacts of those words that have actual changes.
And you saw that. This may not be all you want to talk about, but the part of the rejection of Trump was, I like to think, a rejection of his politics of exclusion. I know your folks were really heavily affected by what was effectively the Muslim ban. We call it the Muslim ban.
Sure.
That was a guy who explicitly said he only wanted people from Norway to immigrate. Norway's fine, but it's like the richness of the country and the strength of the country is always, and the way we've dealt with labor shortages has always been immigration, and we shouldn't be fearful of it. We should be celebrating it.
You heard the comedians talk about a day without Mexicans. Imagine a day without Iranians, East Asians. I mean, this country and this entire tech sector, by the way. Not to mention the heads of medical schools and all the. So I'm not saying the immigrant community has all the solutions. I'm just saying, hey, it takes this rich fabric of society to make it work, and it's been an amazing experience. I've been always so proud to be here and try to, just like yourself, try to be as best public servant as I could, because I feel a debt to society from the day I walked in. And I think a lot of people feel that way. That's why we ended up in public service, right? We could talk a lot more. I know you're busy, but I just wanted to ask one last question about what do you see coming in the legislative calendar? Anything else we should be aware of? Any hopeful, aspirational goals that the Congress wants to get done?
Well, I think this bipartisan infrastructure bill is very important to me. It has a lot of what President Biden set out in his very progressive and very long and expensive list of goals. We should take that victory. We should show that the country can work together. And I think Democrats have a lot more aspirations after that, which is great. I think, one issue that may be of interest to your community is what we're going to do about immigration.
Right.
Obviously Democrats support the Dream and Promise Act, taking care of Dreamers and DACA recipients. I know a lot of people think that's just Mexican Americans or prospective Mexican Americans, but we know that it's other communities. And I've spoken personally to Muslim Dreamers and would be proud to have them as fellow Americans. We have a bipartisan proposal for temporary family visitation that would allow people to visit for special occasions. We've had issues with people being able to come in for funerals and weddings, and the applications are disproportionately denied from folks from the Middle East, Pacific Islanders, South Asia. And, we'd like to rationalize all of that. I think that there's a real desire on both sides of the aisle to do that. It's always getting by leadership, and there's such potent political power, I think, in the Republicans' demonization of immigrants as the other. Right. But I think every chamber of commerce knows that this is really vital to our survival and to our prosperity. And so, we'll keep working at that. But, we're trying to work on some climate issues. I've had some luck in getting some climate things passed. I really try to find bipartisan support because it's a heck of a lot easier if you can find the industry to work with you. We've done pretty well in that. And then I always look for things that are important to San Diego, because they say representative is both your job title and your job description. Mm-hmm. So, my idea is to make sure that we're looking at the military, about our innovation in life sciences and the border and tourism, all the things that drive San Diego. We pay a lot of attention to that. So I just encourage you and your community to reach out if they've got ideas for us and if we can be helpful. But It's such an honor to represent this district and also to call you my fellow American Shahriyar and my friend. And thank you for inviting me.
Thank you for coming. We learned so much. Please come back soon. Congressman Scott Peters, thank you for joining us.
All right, be well.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.